It's a Wednesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, and I've got to ask the question, why are so many people positive about an 0-3 basketball team in preseason? That's the vibe that I'm getting right now from ESPN, from our own Matt Moore, and elsewhere. Plus, Ja and Jaren allegedly are ramping up, getting ready perhaps for opening night, especially in the case of Ja, and there's a preseason game, unfortunately, this evening for the Memphis Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello. Welcome to this installment of Locked On Grizzlies. It is I, Joe Mullinax, your host for this episode of the show. No DeMichael Cole, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal on this episode of the program. It's a busy time of year for us both, of course, so we're making it work to make sure that you are getting an episode each and every day here during the week on Locked On Grizzlies. And of course, today is no different. Thank you so much for being with me for the next 30 minutes or so as we talk Memphis Grizzlies basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, YouTube. Literally anywhere you get a podcast, you can get Locked On Grizzlies. Make DeMichael and myself part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption each and every time that an episode drops. I have been getting a reputation here on this program, on social media, for being a negative guy regarding the 2025-2026 Memphis Grizzlies. And there's reasons for that. I am not beyond reproach when it comes to admitting my biases. I was a Taylor Jenkins guy. I'm not disputing that it was time to move on from Taylor Jenkins, but I liked Taylor Jenkins as a coach. I also loved Desmond Bane and felt that he was a really significant contributor to that past era, the last several years of Memphis Grizzlies basketball. So the team looks different, and I am unsure of how that's going to work out. Two key components that I thought were major reasons why the Grizzlies were able to stay afloat in the dark times of the Ja Morant suspension and all the injuries beyond Ja and everything that's gone wrong for this team the last couple of years. To me, Taylor Jenkins making chicken salad out of chicken you-know-what, and Desmond Bane being an overachiever in terms of his draft position and being one of the most efficient offensive players in the NBA now. That's not hyperbole, it's fact. I struggle with seeing this team for the Grizzlies as better in the wake of moving on from both Jenkins and Bane at the same time. However, dear listener, dear viewer, if you are hopeful that I'm going to be wrong, I have two very strong sources that align and agree with you. The Memphis Grizzlies are seen as a 50-plus win team that is a top 5 seed in the Western Conference by ESPN and by Matt Moore at HP Basketball on X, Locked On NBA podcast host, Lock On Nuggets as well. In his rankings, he also has the Grizzlies in the top 5 in the Western Conference, which by logic would have the Grizzlies as one of the top 10 teams in the entire NBA. Now I'm going to pause right here for a second. Surely injuries are not part of this equation, right? Because the Grizzlies are without Ja Morant currently. The Grizzlies are without Jaren Jackson Jr. Likely to have Ja back by opening night, probably not Jaren, although we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the show. Brandon Clark certainly will not be there on opening night, nor will Zach Edey. So Memphis is down 40% of their rotation, projected rotation, already just before the games even start to count. So it's hard for me to look at this current version of the roster and say, yep, that is a top 5 team in the West, baby. But on the same hand, if you are looking at everybody through the same lens of health, if you're not just going to write off a team because, oh, that guy's always unavailable. If you're not going to do that to everybody, and you assume the Grizzlies trot out a roster of Ja Morant and Jalen Wells and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Jaren Jackson Jr. and Zach Edey as the starters, with Ty Jerome and Santi Aldama playing huge roles off the bench. Scottie Pippen Jr., of course, as well. Brandon Clark. maybe you can talk yourself into 50-plus wins for this group. The way that the Grizzlies are structured currently, they certainly have the look of a team that can have some regular season success. Joe Morant is an explosive athlete that is going to have his way more often than not in regular season situations where there's not as much game planning game to game for one individual player, as opposed to a playoff series where multiple days of film and install and scout can be dedicated to limiting what a team can do. So the Grizzlies and the skill set of Joe Morant are simply set up more for regular season success. The same is true of Jaren Jackson Jr. and his isolation scoring. So while the pick and roll movement back to trying to do what Zach Edey, but most importantly, Joe Morant do best in those pick and roll sets, theoretically could set up Memphis for a little bit more postseason success. But it certainly is a regular season team. They've been a regular season team in the past. So to say that they are going to be a regular season team again, not that much of a reach. It's not that much of a reach when you put aside the Taylor Jenkins angst that I feel and acknowledge that time had come for a change. And Tumas Isolo, despite being on last year's staff, is pretty clearly a change. He is handling himself differently. He is rotating differently in terms of his players. We still have no idea what an actual rotation is going to look like. That's important to point out because the Grizzlies have not had a chance to trot out an actual NBA rotation just yet. But when that day comes, that glorious, beautiful day, I have a feeling that he is going to utilize the talent at his full implementation a little bit differently than Taylor Jenkins did. Zach Edey is going to see a larger role. DeMichael has talked about that. I've talked about that. Lots of folks have talked about that. I think that you're going to see Ty Jerome fill the void admirably to an extent of what Desmond Bane was capable of. Now, I don't want to, I talked about the importance of Desmond Bane a little while ago. Certainly not writing off all that matters there. Ty Jerome is not better than Desmond Bane. If he was, he would have gotten a much better contract in the offseason and free agency than he did. Desmond Bane is Desmond Bane. Ty Jerome is Ty Jerome. What Ty Jerome is capable of as a three-point shooter, as a creator of offense off the bounce, off the dribble, maybe he's not as good as Bane. There's not really a maybe there. He isn't as good as Bane. But offensively in particular, is Memphis, they're obviously losing a superior player, but in terms of scheme. And I think that's where the leap of faith comes from for a lot of people that I struggle with. Ty Jerome, Zach Edey, Jalen Wells. How often throughout this offseason have we heard about how these guys are perfect fits for the types of schemes that the Grizzlies want to implement? Maybe that's the case. And maybe that should carry some weight because the Grizzlies are deeper when healthy than they were a year ago. Is the sum of Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Ty Jerome better than Desmond Bane? Probably not. But the gap's not as big as maybe you think it is, and it provides more depth for Memphis. They can spread out minutes across multiple players and multiple parts of the rotation. David Locke in our NBA squad show on the Western Conference that we'll talk more about, it'll be on our feeds here in the next day or so. David Locke, owner of Locked On Podcast Network and also the host of Locked On Jazz, he has a theory that in order to win in the NBA today, you have to be able to fill all 100 or 240 minutes of chartable rotation time in a game with NBA rotation players. When the Grizzlies are healthy, who do they got? Ja Morant, Jalen Wells, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Jaren Jackson Jr., Zach Edey, Scottie Pippen Jr., Ty Jerome, Brandon Clark, Santi Aldama. You figure out who the 10th man is. Maybe it's Cedric Coward. Maybe it's G.G. Jackson. The Grizzlies are pretty close to that 240 mark. And that regular season depth, while it may not always lead to victories in the postseason, that regular season depth is going to pay dividends for this team. So ESPN has the Grizzlies losing in the first round to the Clippers. But if Memphis makes the playoffs, not the play-in, the playoffs, and if the Grizzlies are a top 4 seed, I highly doubt anybody complains about them losing in the first round because you're moving on from Jenkins, because you're moving on from Bane. It is a true resetting of an era. In the first year of that, to be able to have that kind of success would be a major coup for the Grizzlies organization. Let me know in the comments. Hit me up on X at Joe Mullinax. Why do you think there's sources like ESPN and our buddy Matt Moore being so positive, so bullish on what the Memphis Grizzlies are capable of, especially for a team that's 0-3 in the preseason, right? Obviously, that doesn't matter. We'll talk more about that here in a bit. But it's not like the performance in recent days has inspired that level of confidence. When we return here on Locked On Grizzlies, someone that people should be confident about, Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr. are ramping up, whatever the heck that means. We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people can't name all of their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you put off organizing your finances, Monarch's for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all of your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. You can maximize investments, increase your savings rate, review your finances with your partner or spouse or a financial advisor, and keep a clear view of your financial health week to week or long term. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNBA. Today's episode is also brought to you by Gametime. Basketball season is officially here, and nothing beats being in the arena for those opening games. Let's be real, though. Tickets can be a total headache, acquiring them at least, between waiting in queues, surprise fees, and prices that jump right before checkout. It's easy to get frustrated when all you want to do is cheer on your team. That's when Gametime comes in, the app that gives fans the advantage. It's your ultimate life hack for scoring amazing NBA tickets fast, easy, and stress-free. I love that what you see is what you pay. There are no hidden fees at checkout. Plus, you can see exactly where your seat is going to be, where your view would be, before you buy the tickets in their in-app seat view feature. And you can even find NBA tickets for under $25. That's an amazing deal. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Go check out Gametime today. So DeMichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal, DeMichael Cole also of Locked On Grizzlies, of course, was at Grizzlies practice on Tuesday, and DeMichael sent along this report from Tuomas Isalo, of course. And this is something that people are going to get excited about. I saw a lot of excitement on X. People are ready for whatever Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. visuals they can get their eyes on. Tuomas Isalo said Tuesday that Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. are progressing well and doing significantly more, in quotes. Here we go again. Now, I don't know about you, but I trust the Memphis Grizzlies training staff about as far as I can throw them. And I'm not as strong as I once was, so I'm not throwing these folks very far in particular. I know there's been turnover, right? But the way that whoever is running medical or the policy of the Grizzlies, and it's good that I'm doing this because DeMichael probably doesn't want to be part of this conversation. Understandably so. The reality is the Grizzlies say somebody's out. Who knows if that's the actual length that they're going to be out for? Ja Morant is the king of this, right? Severe ankle sprain, out 4 to 6 weeks. He's back in 2, right? Oh, this is not going to be a long-term issue. Fast forward 6 months and the guy's still out. Maybe not 6 months, but a couple of months. You get my point. A lot of disconnect when it comes to the messaging from the Memphis Grizzlies regarding their health of their players. So when Tuomas Isalo comes out and says Ja and Jaren are ramping up for what? Are they ramping up for trying to play in a preseason game? That seems unlikely for Jaren. Maybe it could be possible for Ja. Are they ramping up specifically all in for opening night? And if that's the case, are they going to be able to get into game shape and do the things that they need to do from a playing time standpoint to have the impact in that opening night game that I'm sure especially Ja Morant wants to have. Those questions matter. Is it worth it to rush Jaren Jackson Jr. back? That question matters. The Grizzlies need a healthy Jaren beyond just opening night. Ja Morant is the straw that stirs the drink. Don't get it twisted. But Jaren Jackson Jr. is a highly important player in his own right, and arguably the best two-way player on the Memphis Grizzlies roster. There may not even be that much of an argument about it. So if you don't have Jaren, you don't have Ja, how does timing work out in a preseason game? DeMichael and I have talked about the significance of seeing who else can play, right? Because your bare bones skill set is on full display when 4 of your top 10 players are out already in the preseason. Can you get your own shot without Ja Morant on the court? Are you able to rim protect without the weak side assistance of Jaren Jackson Jr.? A lot of the answers so far this preseason have been no. That is why the Grizzlies are 0-3. Maybe that changes tonight in Charlotte. We'll talk more about that. But the Grizzlies are 0 for the preseason so far because there is a noticeable talent gap. And they're not executing at the level that they would be if Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. in particular were on the floor. So this ramping up towards what? I don't need the Grizzlies to win and prioritize competing in preseason games. The way they compete is what matters. And that has left a lot to be desired, whether it's turnovers and protecting possessions, whether it's rebounding and gaining extra possessions on the offensive glass. Rim protection has been abysmal at times. It's been a layup line in some stretches of quarters for the opponents going against the Memphis Grizzlies. That didn't used to be the case. But it's preseason basketball. How much weight can you put into the pros and the cons, the heights and the lows? It's a fair question to ask. The Grizzlies need Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. to be fully ramped up as soon as possible if they hope to be that team that ESPN and Matt Moore of HP Basketball fame, their projections. It has to start with Ja and Jaren. And part of the negativity, or realism maybe, that I have subscribed to over the last couple of weeks is the sheer fact that those guys are not on the court. The 2 highest paid players of the Memphis Grizzlies roster are not on the court. Zach Edey figures to be the biggest beneficiary from this new coaching staff, and he is currently not on the court. You're down 3 starters. And even if you want to argue that starting doesn't matter, it does impact the way that your rotation gets implemented and operates. So it's good to hear that Ja is ramping up. But is he going to be able to handle the weight and the cuts and all the pressure that's going to come along with it? That bears watching in the days to come. Because if he can't, for a preseason game, you probably should just sit him out. The same is true on the opposite end of the spectrum for Jaren Jackson Jr. We know he had surgery. So Jaren is trying to get ready to play and play as quickly as he can. But again, it's an 82-game season. The season starts next week, literally a week from today. And it doesn't end until early to mid-April. So we're talking about literally 6 months of basketball here with a couple of breaks in between. What Jaren and Ja need to do is prioritize their long-term health. And I want to stress, you might be sitting there listening, viewing as an everydayer. Joe, you're a hypocrite. Joe, you've been talking about why these games matter in terms of rotation and in terms of improving players and getting their timing down. That has to be true for Ja and Jaren, right? To an extent, yes. But my biggest issue with the second game of the preseason wasn't that guys were sitting. It's who was sitting. Players that didn't need to sit were sitting that game out despite having extended breaks coming up going into the weekend from that Wednesday contest last week. So it feels like there's missed connectors. It feels like there's one end communicating one way and there's one end communicating the other way. And in the court of public opinion, the Memphis Grizzlies are going to have to find a way to survive, hopefully not without both Ja and Jaren, but certainly almost certainly, without Jaren to start. This ramping up, is it appeasement? That's what I'm kind of leaning towards. Let me know what you think in the comments. Hit me up on X at Joe Mullinax. Are people just trying to be appeased or be appeasing for those that are frustrated by the current state of play for the Grizzlies? And they're saying, yeah, John and Jaren are ramping up and you'll see them in 8 days, whatever the case might be, right? When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to close out this episode previewing Grizzlies Hornets. I want to stress it is not going to actually be a preview because I could care less about the Hornets. We're going to talk about players to watch in the game tonight for Memphis. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer that you do not want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love FanDuel. Didn't work out for my Commanders this past Monday, a tough loss to the Bears, but being able to place parlays around those games, tying them into player props, following the line live during games, and even made a tough loss for my Commanders more enjoyable. It makes watching football more exciting when you have a little something riding on the action. And whether you're a casual fan or love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Go and get that rolling. We're closing up this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. It is I, Joe Mullinax, your host for this episode. No DeMichael Cole because DeMichael is very busy this time of year. He'll be back with us soon talking Grizzlies basketball, I promise. And it'll be a wonderful, wonderful day when the dynamic duo rides once more. But today, in a game against the Charlotte Hornets, which I am happy to say is a 7 o'clock East Coast start time, which means 6 o'clock in the central region for a majority of you that are Grizzlies fans in and around the Memphis greater metropolitan area. It's an hour earlier for me, which I like. Grizzlies take on the Hornets. And I want to stress something, okay? Again, the fact that Charlotte is favored by 1.5 in a preseason game makes me worried for the future of the United States of America, that people are actively wagering on meaningless preseason games. But the Grizzlies are not favored against Charlotte going into this contest. If the team was healthy, if this was a game in January or February, I highly doubt that Charlotte would be a 1.5 favorite. But that's where they are today. And what the Grizzlies need to completely work through their minds is that if they want to compete, as they did against Atlanta at times, there has to be a commitment to getting one Cedric Coward going. He is my number one guy to keep an eye on in this contest because Cedric Coward is a catalyst for offensive efficiency. He can hit the three. He can score in the mid-range. He has shown some facilitation skills. He makes poor choices, but a lot of them do that with the ball in their hands. I love the raw talent of Cedric Coward. And as things get tighter with the regular season coming, as the games start to count, are the Grizzlies going to allow for a player like Coward to have the long leash in terms of not being yanked out of games, not being taken out of situations because of mistakes being made? Will that be there for Cedric Coward? That's a great question to ask. I'm also interested in watching, assuming he plays, Ty Jerome. And spoiler alert, Ty Jerome is going to be one of my answers often as we will talk through on Locked On Grizzlies because I love Ty Jerome's skill set as a scorer, the way he creates off the bounce. He does so many things that are going to be so valuable to this Grizzlies unit. Can he do it as a starter compared to a reserve? Because as I've talked about Tyus Jones before, Tyus Jones was not a true backup point guard. Tyus Jones was not somebody that could come in for 16 minutes a game and give you good minutes relieving your point guard. He was a substitute teacher, as I've said before. He would come in and fill in for Ja when Ja was out. But Ja is the one max contract player on this roster. So Ja's going to play a lot of basketball when he's healthy. At least he should. So where does that leave Ty Jerome? Obviously, Ty's not going to be able to play next to Ja in this contest. But how he defends, how he takes to the defensive scheme. Can he find ways to get a rebound and start fast breaks off of those boards? There are so many possibilities with the game of Ty Jerome that I would love to see him have that chance to organize himself, put himself out there in terms of a competition and see what he can do. I'm also intrigued by the idea of watching Santi Aldama as a starter. Because Santi, when the team is healthy, is going to be a reserve. I don't think anybody disagrees with that logic. But with Jaren Jackson Jr. and Zach Edey out, to a lesser extent Brandon Clark, you could pretty easily argue that some receivers might be heading out that way so the formations of Memphis don't get blatantly destroyed. That's probably wise. But how Santi is able to intermix and intermingle from that starting concept to coming off the bench, from being more of an offensive weapon where that's the focal point, to being somebody that is being asked defensively to do more. Can Santi rise to that challenge? We have international basketball evidence to suggest that he can, but will he? That's another bridge entirely, right? So I'm interested in watching Santi Aldama defensively on the perimeter when he's in switches. Can he hold his own? How viable is he as a big wing, not just as a big? Because for somebody like Santi Aldama to make the money that he does, to get the contract that he got, and only play one position, it's a little bit much for a specialist. The last guy that I am excited to watch play football tonight, not football, excuse me, basketball, Freudian slip. The one person I'm excited to watch play basketball tonight, more than anybody, is Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. And I say more than anybody, even more so than Ty Jerome. That's what threw me off. My brain was frazzled because I didn't say Ty Jerome in this spot. But assuming Kentavious Caldwell-Pope plays, and again, there's a chance he doesn't, because maybe in fairness to Tumas Isalo, who I've been hard on, it seems, the reality of the situation is of any Grizzlies player that has actually played multiple preseason games, with KCP, you could say, I've seen enough. This guy still got it. What happened in Orlando is what happened in Orlando. But in Memphis, Caldwell-Pope is knocking down shots. He's able to dribble a little bit more than I thought he would be able to. He can facilitate offense in that secondary or mostly tertiary role as a third facilitator to allow for slashers and cutters to get to the basket. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope looks like the guy that helped lead the Denver Nuggets to an NBA Finals. And if that Kentavious Caldwell-Pope shows up for Memphis, he is going to elevate the team. Not just in terms of his execution, not just in terms of his competitiveness, but in terms of his professionalism. And you've heard KCP talk about that often. The importance of veterans in locker rooms to show players how to do things the right way. John Morant is a veteran NBA player now. Jaren Jackson Jr. is a veteran NBA player. Cedric Howard's not. Jalen Wells is not. Zach Edey is not. Are you picking up what I'm putting down here? To have somebody in the locker room that can help mentor those guys, plus be a meaningful defensive contributor, plus knock down a couple open threes a game. Again, Desmond Bane's the better player. But if we're talking about fit, KCP could be a really impressive fit for this team. So I'm watching Ty Jerome. I'm watching Santi Aldama. I'm watching Cedric Howard. I'm watching Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Who are you looking for in the game coming up tonight? Again, no offense to the Hornets. I could care less about them. It's all about the Grizzlies, and obviously we will be breaking down Grizzlies-Hornets, the outcome, who played well, who did not, going into the preseason finale later on this week. Talk about all that on tomorrow's show. Thank you so much for being with me on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies and making us your first listen every day. For your second listen, go find Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Josh Lloyd hosts the #1 fantasy basketball podcast, giving you daily tips and helping you win your league, all while making you a smarter NBA fan. Find Locked On Fantasy Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Next time we see you will be tomorrow. And to be honest with you, it might be tonight, depending on when you check out the episode. We are doing that new push to record episodes, put them out as quickly as possible after games. That will continue with Wednesday. Maybe it gets a late Thursday push, Thursday night, Wednesday night, Thursday morning kind of situation. That's possible. But the next episode, we'll talk Grizzlies penultimate preseason contest against the Hornets. Who looked good, who didn't. We'll keep breaking down the season ahead on the next episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, YouTube. Make sure that you're making DeMichael and myself part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content conversation each and every time that an episode drops. We appreciate you being on every day. We appreciate you being with us each and every time. DeMichael or I are on these podcast waves. Until the next time, see ya.